You are listening to the Playlist Podcast. Welcome back. This is our second podcast of 2014. I'm your host, Eric McClanahan. And with me via Skype today is Editor-in-Chief Rodrigo Perez and contributor Corey Everett. Both of them were our writers on the ground at Sundance this year, and we're here to talk about the festival. Some of the films, but other things going on at the festival and sort of looking at the festival as a whole. So I'm going to go to Rod first, and why don't you just give me your overall impressions of this year's festival?
I thought it was a good festival. I mean, it had some of its problems in terms of the curating of it, but it's you can't have the most amazing fest in every single year. I think it was slightly weaker than last, but I did see my share of I guess sort of quote unquote Sundancey films. That sort of, I don't know if readers or anybody saw that Sundance cliche sort of mock you video thing, that sort of lighthearted dig on Sundance or indie films, and I definitely saw my share of those. At least the less of the quirky kind of ones that people like to make fun of, and more of the darker, depressing, miserablest ones. But I still saw enough highlights that I really enjoyed myself, and yeah, I was having this conversation with someone else. I mean, it's still the most essential film festival in the United States.
Corey, how about you? Overall impressions?
I had a great time. It was my fourth year going, and I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just something about sort of coming to peace with my expectations for the festival, and I've gotten into a thing where certain years I'll be surprised by stuff that you're sure when you're there in the room is going to kind of have a bigger impact on a wider audience, and then just it doesn't really go anywhere besides Netflix streaming at the end of the day. And it's always a little bit disappointing when you think back to some of the movies over the years that have really made a splash, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, or things like that really had a wider impact. And just thinking that the movies in the past couple of years that I've been going haven't really seemed to resonate in that way. And yet, on the other hand, like I said, I maybe it's just adjusting my expectations and really just kind of enjoying the little gems I can find, regardless of how they're going to end up, playing when they reach a wider audience.
Right. That's part of it, expectations, but it's also, you got to remember just like the relative nature of films that in general kind of like making a different impact these days, because of just the way the industry has changed. And, Netflix and VOD is not the four-letter word that it used to be. So some of those films are going to be, Drinking Buddies made like $3 million on VOD. It was a huge success. Yes.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, like a huge, huge success. Not every one of these films is going to be that, but some of them are. And, there's things that like The Way Back, which was a big, sold for a lot of money last year and kind of came and went and did nowhere. Went theatrically anyhow. Didn't really catch on with audiences. But the inverse is always true. There's always something that makes a big splash and then doesn't get like a lot of attention once it hits theatrical, and then the reverse is true sometimes. I'm a little bit brain dead because from Sundance, but I know that there's examples are out there, and I think.
Well, I mean, some that I'm thinking of from last year, you guys were both really, really excited about Ain't Them Bodies Saints, David Lowery's film, and that's a film that I loved from last year as well. But at least in Portland, it played in one theater for a week and just disappeared. And I always thought that was such a shame, because it came at the end of the summer here, and I think generally that's when it was released. Seemed like a good time for a movie with some genre elements in it, a really strong cast, and for it to just sort of peter out like that, I just thought that was a shame. And I know, both of you guys were so excited about that movie at the festival last year.
I would say, I guess my only argument against that is that, like, that happens to movies all the time, regardless whether at the Sundance or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's lots of movies. You're basically what you're saying, this connected with critics and didn't connect with audiences. Happens all the time. Happens out of every single festival. Happens out of movies that don't come to festivals. It's not that, you know what I mean? I don't think it's a Sundance specific thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm trying to think. I'm not sure how did something like Upstream Color like fare when it all was said and done? Like, it had a decent theatrical run in some cities?
I think considering he did it
himself.
Yeah, I think it was definitely successful for him. but it certainly didn't like move the needle in a huge way. I think it did maybe over 1 million or something. But for in that sense, like for his scale, I think it did very well. For those people who, I mean, you always got to be buzz and dollars don't equate the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we've known that for a long time, and we know that critics freaking out about stuff. I mean, that's a perfect example of a film that, like, probably goes over a lot of audiences' heads. I know a lot of people in our comment section were always going like, "This movie's terrible. Why do you guys keep supporting it?" And it's like, there was this one guy who was always saying like we were trying to make it happen. It's like, no one's trying to make anything happen. The movie's either going to connect or it's not. We just talk about the things that we like. That's what every site does. We happen to like that one. We did interviews, we did reviews, things like that, but it didn't connect, and it's a shame, but it happens all the time. So I don't really. And some of those films have longer lifespans. Sometimes they pick up later. They become cult classics down the road.
I get this feeling, I've yet to go to a Sundance Film Festival, and I really, of course, it's something I would love to do, but I get this feeling that even maybe in what might be a lesser year that you guys are describing, it's still worth it to get out there. If for nothing else, you're going to probably at least find one, maybe a couple films that really resonate, that really do hit you, despite how well they go on to do. Is that the case? I mean, is the festival still important? Is still worth going to, would you say?
Yeah, and I actually, maybe it was just a virtue of I got to stay a little bit longer this year after my flight was canceled, and ended up seeing more movies than I ever had. So I caught 22 in about 6 days, and maybe just because the sheer volume of what I saw, this might have been my favorite year yet, because I would say about a dozen of those movies I feel really good about, in the top 5 of which, I'm pretty sure I'll be talking about later this year as well. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe just the breadth of kind of what I was able to see when I was there. I had a good year.
Do you guys get the sense that I feel like any film festival you go to, sometimes there's that bubble you get into where you're surrounded by people that are all generally passionate about movies. And sometimes something you see might seem better in that festival, environment than if you were to revisit it later. Does Sundance have that? It seems like Sundance could be even like a more extreme version of that.
I mean, every festival has that to a degree, for sure. Mm-hmm. South by Southwest certainly does.
Yeah.
South by Southwest is a little bit notorious for that, I think. But every festival has that, especially when you're traveling in packs and comparing notes and excited together. I don't really do that. I just sort of like run to screenings, and I see Corey, but I could see it happening with like pack mentality a little bit, because I know that happens. A lot of people travel in packs, and I think your excitement for something can probably only grow in a post conversation with a lot of people, and I think the reverse is true as well. Your hatred for something.
For me, it's funny because I feel almost like the opposite ways. If you're at a premiere of a movie, I mean, if it's a second or third screening, it's a different thing. But if you're at the actual premiere, you're watching it and you are just 100% sure of how you feel, and then it'll be funny sometimes afterwards to be thinking, "Oh, that was great," or "Oh, that was horrible," and turn to the people next to you or Twitter or whatever and see that everyone felt the opposite way, and I don't think that really makes me question how I felt because I was so sure of it, but it's really the only time you can go into a movie and not have those expectations or kind of buzz that you're going with or going against.
Yeah, the thing that affects people. And that's where actually sometimes audiences they get a little bit, I guess, annoyed because they still hear all this buzz and expectations will grow for them, and they'll be like, it wasn't that good. But Corey's right. We sort of have the benefit of seeing a blank slate and experience it. People will be excited for whatever degree, but you don't have a whole, it's not like 6 months later where you've heard all this noise about it, good or bad, and then you project that onto it when you see it, and that can be that's unfortunately part of the nature of things. I think some audiences need to let that go, but it happens. So,
Corey, I'm so excited that The Raid 2 is your favorite movie of the festival, by the way.
Good. Yeah. It was, man, what a fun time. Not as perfect. I mean, I think the first one, I've seen it 4 or 5 times. I think it's pretty much a perfect movie and such a anomaly of just it's so compact, and there's no extra anything. It's just the bare elements. And this is a very, very different sort of movie, so it took me a while to wrap my head around that, but it's still got a lot of great stuff in it.
Is it 2.5 hours? Did I read that right?
Yeah, it's I think just under 2.5 hours.
All right. And so how is it just different from the first film, I guess, if at all?
Well, the first one, as I was saying, is a very unique movie in that it's a completely contained environment. It's almost 90 minutes of wall-to-wall action broken into these little 10-minute sections so that you're never bored. So it's constantly escalating. It's constantly giving you just enough character and story to keep it moving, but never slowing down. So it like I said, it's pretty close to a perfect movie, or at least perfect action movie for sure. Mm-hmm. And the new one is very different intentionally. It's a sprawling crime epic. It introduces a lot of new characters. It has a lot of locations. It's different in almost every way. And part of the reason is that the director, Gareth Evans, had been trying to get this script made prior to making The Raid, and he couldn't get the money from anybody. So basically, after The Raid was a hit and people were asking him what he wanted to do next, he decided to dust off this script and kind of retrofit it into making it a sequel to The Raid, but basically keeping the kind of bones of it intact. So that's why it definitely has a different feeling. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all. I think, like some of the best sequels, it does a great job of expanding the world that was very narrow in the first one, and here you're getting a much deeper sense of the corruption and the kind of characters that inhabit this world, and obviously the fight scenes are just crazy, and there's a chance on a bigger scale here to do more. So there's these car chases that are just really, you've never seen anything like. And, people after the screening were saying, this guy, Gareth Evans, is probably, one of, if not the, best just straight action directors working today. And literally after every big fight sequence, the theater would applaud like they were watching a Broadway show, and big musical number just finished, which is really just, it's the ideal kind of way to see something like this.
Yeah.
So,
well, I imagine, and Rod has already mentioned that some of the films this year were, or maybe a number of them were real, like tough to sit through, kind of miserable-less movies, you could label them. I imagine something like The Raid 2 must just be a breath of fresh air. Like if you're kind of going through a lot of heavy drama, it sounds like that might be the case.
Yeah, it really, Sundance, the slate is so diverse. It's kind of, you can have whatever Sundance you want to have, I think, because there's a lot of different sections and a lot going on, and sure, there's probably strains of the Sundance-y type movie, but I'll bet if you move to some of the other sections, you could find some different stuff. For example, if you stick to the midnight movies or the premieres or whatever, you're going to get a range of stuff all over the board. Another movie that I had a lot of fun with was The Guest. From Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett, who just did You're Next, which I actually wasn't crazy about, but I had a ton of fun with this. And again, it's kind of what you think, oh God, I wouldn't expect something this fun to be at Sundance, but really that's kind of my own fault for not digging into that section a little more.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Sundance is what you make it. You could watch just only documentaries. You could watch there's enough midnight stuff to just see things like that. There's all kinds of stuff. There's like 50 some films or something. It's pretty diverse slate. You could catch up on a whole bunch of 2014 stuff like Only Lovers Left Alive, or 2013 stuff that screened at festivals in 2013, like Locke, Only Lovers Left Alive,
Ida,
The Double, which I loved.
Yeah, Field in England. So yeah, there's lots of stuff. And my experience isn't necessarily that, because of I'm sort of the head writer. I'm sort of obligated to see a lot of things that
the big stuff.
Yeah, so that kind of that sort of taints my experience sometimes too, because I'm a little bit obligated to see that stuff, and I don't necessarily want to.
Right. Well, I'm going to get at that. I think that's really interesting, Rod. Like what? It's almost like it's very akin to, there's movies that we know are coming out later in the year that we're already slating them as Oscar potential. And I wonder why there is this. Where does this obligation spring from when most of us are going in very cold to these movies at Sundance? Where,
well, I mean, it's a pretty boring answer, but it's just that the site, you want to get traffic for bigger things. You want to be there. You want to have reviews of that stuff, so you go see that stuff. But it doesn't necessarily. It's not always the stuff that you think is going to be good. So
right. Is it? But is that translating to general audiences? Are people lining up for those movies that, say, maybe a typical Sundance movie that might have sort of like a lot of fairly popular, maybe comedic actors in dramatic roles? That's one of those tropes you see, or it's got a certain sensibility.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? It's ironically about all that. I'm mentioning that I tried to go see big stuff. I actually ended up missing a lot of that stuff, or I just sort of changed my mind at the last minute. Like, Skeleton Twins that I think Corey saw was, Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader. And I don't even think it's a comedy, but I think it's the two of them in dramatic. And that felt like something that I should see. That was definitely one of those that, like, I should go see that. And for whatever reason, I missed it. And I feel like there's a few of those like that I actually ended up missing.
Mm.
I mean, and one of the things that's interesting that I've learned over the past couple of years of going is that, and it happens every year for the most part, which is that nobody knows anything. So when you're looking at the schedule going in, for the most part, I mean, the premieres, the big stuff, A Most Wanted Man, you get this stuff that already kind of has its pedigree. People want to see that. But as far as the competition stuff goes, the stuff that from, generally first-time filmmakers, second-time filmmakers, coming out of nowhere is, people will look at the schedule of 100 movies and start trying to hedge their bets. And you go, well, Jason Schwartzman's in this one, or Anne Hathaway or whatever. So you start thinking, well, maybe I should check that one out. And what usually ends up happening is the movies that are most looked forward to prior to the festival are not the ones that people are really excited about after the festival. So, something like Beasts of the Southern Wild is a perfect example, which is I completely skipped over it when making my schedule. But then that ends up kind of being the breakout of the fest.
Right. And then, I mean, goes on to an insane level of success with like Oscar nominations and things like that. It's, that's one of those crazy examples. Maybe, Rod, you should talk about maybe a film or two that you, that's something that's worth bringing up, you think?
There's a bunch of things I saw that I liked, but one that is sort of a slow burner and keeps growing in my mind, which I enjoyed quite a lot, was Kimiko the Treasure Hunter. With can someone pronounce her name, because I don't want to mess it up?
Rinko Kikuchi.
Thank you.
Yep.
It's basically just her she's the only really quote unquote star, and it's this sort of like dark fable, I think that was really great.
Kimiko, especially that just the title and the little bit of description, that to me sounds like it must have stood out because it just seems so different compared to most of the type of films we assume that are going to be at Sundance. Or it could not be described as a Sundance-y film. Is that fair about that one?
I think it probably can on the surface, because it's superficially super quirky, and it is kind of quirky, but it also has first of all, quirky is not necessarily a four-letter word, like sentimental or like anything. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? So, anything can be done well, right? Like any style, any genre, any kind of movie or any kind of story. So it has some quirks, but yeah, it's really done well. It's directed really well, super well composed, great performance by her, terrific cinematography, great mood.
Yeah.
And it's not just it's funny because it's kind of like two movies. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's two movies in one, sort of like the beginning and then the journey of the hunt, I guess, or the voyage for this treasure. And that it's almost like two different styles. So it's quite a terrific little movie.
Okay.
Do you want to say what it's about real quick? Just the one sentence, which is it's kind of loosely based on that.
Go ahead.
Kind of urban legend of a girl who supposedly left Japan in search of the money that was buried in the movie Fargo, which because of the true story card at the front of the movie, which is obviously not true. Supposedly she went on this hunt for this money because she believed it was actually buried in Minnesota. So that's kind of loosely what the movie is about. But it's more, like Rod said, kind of a weird fairy tale, dark, kind of quirky. Alexander Payne came on as a producer so that you could see why he was attracted to that, with a little bit of the kind of just deadpan, offbeat, and like you said, it was really
the humor, the deadpan humor is very Alexander Payne.
Yeah, and she's great, and it was one of the more. I wasn't familiar with the Zellner brothers who did the movie, but it was one of the more like beautifully cinematic things that I saw at the festival.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I feel like that's another thing that must stand out at Sundance, because a lot of films are dialogue based or small character based movies. So it must be a real shot in the arm when you get something like Kimiko or something that really is cinematic. Are you guys seeing that? In your couple years, Corey, 4 years in the festival, and Rod, is this your second year going to Sundance? Is that right?
Yeah, it's my second year.
Are you guys noticing, I guess, just with the advent, there's new technology every year that's allowing filmmakers with a lower budget to produce something that looks grand and looks cinematic? Beasts of the Southern Wild is a great example of something like that. Are you guys seeing that more and more at this festival that is there to sort of breed great independent films?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess it is easier to make films these days, at least the technology. But getting a film made is and still isn't the easiest thing in the whole world. That's for sure.
Right. I mean, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, can you even is it easy to find out why, like, you're at the festival, you're on the ground, you're seeing all these films? Does anything emerge that you can see why a certain type of movie seems to go there all the time? Like, there's a reason these cliches about the festival exist, even to outsiders who have not been there, Yeah,
some of it is like stars, films sometimes get accepted because they have, like, I saw two movies, one with Catherine Keener and one with Elle Fanning and John Hawkes, that I really didn't like. I feel like they wallow in miserablest sort of depression and a lot of things about Sundance that seem pretty cliche, and I almost don't want to be too mean about them. I mean, I guess I have been in my reviews, but it's like I don't know who they're for, and I don't know who's going to see them, and I don't know who's going to distribute them, especially one of them, which I don't even want to mention, but it's just, who is going to watch this movie? Who is going to enjoy this movie? Who's this movie for? But, maybe other people like it, so all the more power to them.
Well, yeah, there's a point, especially when you're at a festival, where it just gets relentless if you're seeing films that are...
Yeah, and also, like, let's be fair, I think maybe my experience was tainted because I saw quite a few of those, whereas I don't think Corey saw as many of those. So if he gets to one, maybe he's not going to be as... I don't know, like, worn down by them. Whereas I kind of was, Mm-hmm. I think by the end, I was really getting kind of worn down by these sort of stories. They felt really familiar. They felt oppressive. And they're just wallowing, which it was kind of a miserable experience for me. And just so whatever, but just to get ahead of the pass of the comments that I don't like depressing films, like, that's like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like the one year when everybody hated, which everybody calls the miserablest film, Bitiful, the one with Javier Bardem. That was my favorite movie of that year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody, like, that got roasted at Cannes, mm-hmm. and it a lot of people said it was way too dark for their taste. So, and it kind of just, to me, only proves that dark and miserable isn't necessarily bad. Like, just like anything else, it's depending on what the film and how the film is made and the filmmakers and et cetera.
Right.
And the thing you still have to kind of admire the Sundance. Just the mission for is with, the shrinking middle class at the multiplex, mm-hmm. It's okay. So some of these are miserable and maybe some of them aren't very good, but at the end of the day, it's like Sundance is still the place that's for movies about real people, which is becoming, rarer and rarer on the large scale. And because the kind of mid-budget movies disappearing, you're going to have to kind of go to the smaller budget to find that stuff. And, that they are continuing to do that, I think, is still, increasingly admirable as the adult movie disappears.
You nail it on the head, and it's funny how it dovetails with the economy, Mm-hmm. Like, the middle class is going away. You've got high and low, or big and small kind of thing, and that's exactly what the movie industry is. And yeah, yep. and Sundance caters to it, and yes, absolutely, thumbs up for giving a space and time and to human stories. Not all of them work, but hell yeah, we definitely want them and we appreciate them.
Yeah, we need them for sure.
Absolutely, yeah, they're essential.
How about I'd just like to know a little bit what you guys think about Richard Linklater's film Boyhood, because just on reading about it before it came to the festival, sounded like a classic Richard Linklater idea, taking the idea of literally showing you time passing for what was it, 12 years he made this film with the same boy as he grew, and using the actors. It sounds like it was worth the wait. And did both of you see it? Corey, I know you saw it.
Yeah, we both saw it.
Talk about it a little bit. If Corey, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Boyhood, definitely one of my favorite films at the festival. For some reason, it was different than I expected in a couple ways. One, for whatever reason, I'd had more of a kind of the midsection of Tree of Life in my head. I don't know why. Maybe just the one still of the kid kind of laying on the grass looking up at the sky. I just kind of pictured something more like that, even though that's never been what Richard Linklater does. So, of course, as soon as I settled in, I realized, oh, that's right. This is going to be a Richard Linklater movie, and it made a lot more sense. I was also concerned because it was starting late. I was coming off like a 5-movie day and I was exhausted, but I was just completely awake through the entire thing. And the thing that also kind of surprised me is it's not so it tracks this kid from ages 6 to 18 basically, and two of the cool things it did, one is it doesn't really focus in on every big milestone like you think. You'd think, okay, well, we're going to see his first kiss, and then we're going to see his first this, and outside of a few maybe major events, it doesn't. It focuses on kind of the smaller moments, the in-between moments that give you a real feeling of where he was at that point. And the other cool thing is there's no title cards that say 2002 or it says 8 years old. It just moves seamlessly from one scene to the next. So you just kind of notice, oh, he's bigger now. His hair's different. And you know that time has passed. And the only kind of thing that clues you into where you are, other than, roughly gauging, his size and age, is that there's a bunch of music, which is not cleared yet, he said, but, that kind of identify you to, oh, Coldplay Yellow, this was 2000, or the Phoenix album, that was 2009. So if you kind of know your pop music, you can sort of figure out where you are in the story, and it's great. Yeah, not that you need it, but it kind of, what it did for me is it really held up a mirror, not just to my childhood, but just to the last 12 years of my own life. And God, 2000, 2001, that was so long ago. The world was such a different place. There were no iPhones, there's no Twitter, just the little things. Not that the movie focuses on those, but just that I found myself kind of thinking back to, where I was at this point in time, and how much time has passed if this kid has gone from 6 to 18, in the space of 2.5 hours. And like I said, while it doesn't really have any doesn't have any big gut punch moments along the way that really make you think, oh, that's the scene. But what it has instead is this cumulative effect of by the last 30 minutes or so, you were just so invested, and so you kind of just don't want it to end. You almost wish that, like the Before series, he'd kind of just make a sequel and track this kid through his 20s, till he gets to 30 and so on. It just there's nothing like it. It's kind of it's a small epic.
And so it sounds like the experiment was worth the wait, for sure.
For sure.
Rod, anything to add for the film?
No, I pretty much feel the same way. I feel I feel like my long tail experience of it is a little muted in terms of my enthusiasm for it. I think it's very good. I think it's very special. It hasn't lingered with me like the way some of the other films have, and maybe because of the way what Corey says that it doesn't have a lot of like big emotional moments or any kind of like, it is all about, the small things building up cumulatively, as Corey said. But that said, when I was thinking about my review, like written like a day later, I almost started like just getting a little bit emotional thinking about it. I think I might want to actually see it again because it had been a long day. I saw it very, very near the end of the day, and it was like almost 3 hours. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really something like as Corey said, special, and you haven't seen anything like it. And I love the way that there were no titles and how it just sort of like, I mean, you walk in one room and you walk out the next, and it's almost like 2 years has gone by, you know, and you just sort of have to orient yourself to that.
Right.
There's and it's not like he's being tricky or anything. It's just it's a very fluid kind of editing where like it might take you a second to go, oh, this is actually we're in another time period here, and like some big things happen, but it's kind of awesome how it just sort of like moves to different periods without having to explain, oh, what happened to that? Well, you just figure out in that they got divorced, and that problem that was happening there, it pretty much spelled itself out. You knew it was going to happen anyhow. So it's smart filmmaking in that way that doesn't have to spoon feed you in any way, which I really appreciated.
Right.
Yeah, it's very unassuming. You know, there's no pretension about trying to make some grand statement. It really just is the accumulation of small moments. It's very Richard Linklater, and I think Rod and I both gave it in the strong B. So just to temper expectations, you know, words coming out like masterpiece and all this and that. I mean, everyone should see this movie, but you know, I'm not quite sure. You know, I don't want to set expectations higher than they should be, which is it's a must see, but it's
at the same time I feel like people like, I think Corey and I had this similar reaction to Before Midnight last year,
right?
And like we liked it a lot and thought it was terrific and etc. But I think the critical consensus, or maybe even the audience consensus, was that it was like a near masterpiece. So maybe that'll be the same again. Who knows? And you know, great. I'm more than happy if people like completely connect to this film. I think that would be awesome and terrific.
Well, and Linklater's one of those filmmakers that has been nurtured by the festival. You know, they with his Slacker's, it's his second feature technically, or I think he did a short before that, but Slacker was premieres there, and it becomes this thing, and he's had films throughout the 30 years of Sundance. He's had films appear there. So clearly the festival has done right by him and helped him throughout his career. Do you guys think that Sundance now, 30 years on, is still a place where that can happen? Is it still happening, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's always new voices and new discoveries, and how about, you know, here's an example. How about Alex Ross Perry, who did Listen Up Philip, who you know, people like the color wheel, but it's divisive for one, and I think a lot of the non-professional actors it's maybe a bit of a deal breaker for some, and this to me is almost like his first film like this. Like, I mean, it's not. This is, I guess, his third, but like. It's just like, you know, it's a perfect example of like what Corey and I have been discussing, sort of the Joe Swanberg effect of once you put like real actors to sing your music, it really starts to really sing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's almost like sheet music that I guess was always pretty good, but if you don't have players that aren't playing that music at a certain level, a certain quality, it's almost like, you know, Mozart is obviously too hyperbolic, but a piece of music that's really great, and having the high school band play it versus a bunch of professional orchestra musicians, you know, there's the quality is completely different, you know, the nuance, the texture, and everything, and you see that in certainly in Joe Swanberg's new movies with professional actors in them, and I think the same thing happens with Listen Up Philip, which like. You know, the guy's obviously a very unique, strong, distinctive writer, but man, with like people like Jonathan Pryce and Jason Schwartzman and Elizabeth Moss playing those instruments, it's like, man, does that movie ever sing, you know?
How about, I mean, it sounds like Lynn Shelton would maybe be another example of that. She's starting to get, you know, more well-known actors in her films.
Yeah, that's true as well. I mean, I still find her... I kind of love Lynn, but she still hasn't made the masterpiece or the super solid, terrific movie that she keeps hinting at. But I think she's definitely on her way. And I had problems with Laggies. It's fine. It's a cute little comedy, but it has some it's maybe a little bit more broader and mainstream than what she normally does. And not that there's necessarily wrong with that, but I don't think it completely worked for me.
Okay.
And she also did mention that it's the first film of hers that she didn't write, so I think it was an intentional kind of stepping out of her comfort zone and trying on something different. And as a director, I think she handled it really well. But yeah, I think the problems mostly lie with the script on that one.
Okay. I want to go to Corey first. Is there maybe you have more than one, just a discovery this year, like an example of one of those films? Maybe it's a film, maybe it's an actor or a filmmaker that you came away thinking like, I had no idea anything about this person or this film, and it's something that you're going to be following from now on.
Oh man, just one. I don't know if I have just one. The one movie that me and Rod both felt this way about and haven't really talked about yet is Frank.
Yes. Okay.
Which is just its own unique beast. It is so on its own wavelength that I have no idea how a larger audience is going to respond to it. But so if you're not familiar, it's basically the movie where Michael Fassbender wears a giant papier-mâché head for the entire movie. And he plays this kind of tortured, musical genius in this weird, like avant-garde, like noise rock band. And the actor who was in About Time, what's his name?
Domhnall Gleeson?
Yep. Gleeson, yeah, Brendan Gleeson's son. So he plays this kind of nebbish, normal guy, aspiring musician, and he ends up getting recruited by this band after their keyboard player leaves to fill in on keyboards. And so he kind of gets swept away into their own weird world where they're playing shows and recording. And the synopsis does not really do it justice to how kind of weird and off the wall it is. Rod, do you want to add some stuff to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's another one. Like, like people might say, God, that sounds like such a quirky, off the wall, perfectly Sundance film. And one, I don't know, maybe it is. B, two, who cares? Like, it's awesome. It's like, and it's kind of not. It's just like, it's really, really terrific. It's a awesome little look at artistic collaboration and outsiders and misfits and fitting in and not fitting in, dreams. There's also like this really kind of awesome examination of like sort of like the realization of your artistic merit and I don't even want to spoil it too much, but just like how, I don't know, there's a little bit of poisoning the well, if you know what I mean. This guy is not necessarily the best thing for this band ultimately, and it's also quite moving sometimes. It's very, very funny. It's very deadpan. I was hysterically laughing throughout, but the last half gets dark and I think some
surprisingly poignant.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people thought it lost its focus a little bit, but I think the darkness in the last act is what makes it special ultimately. Otherwise, you've just got like, just funny stuff that is still pretty good, but I think the ending is kind of essential to tying it all together.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like it'll be at least a cult movie for anyone who's ever been in a band, especially a young, noisy band will definitely find a lot to relate to.
Yeah, it's kind of like a look at almost outsider art and outsider rock or something. You know what I mean? Like this band is kind of the equivalent of like the Velvet Underground. 40 years later, who never, obviously everyone loves them now, but they didn't get a second of attention during the day, and they were geniuses, and it's kind of almost a similar kind of trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And great music.
Yeah, fantastic music. Like, I can't wait to get on that soundtrack.
Very nice. Well, I mentioned earlier that this was the 30th anniversary for Sundance, and I think it's worth just looking at some of the films that have lasted and actually have become, I think it's fair to say some of them are certified classics now with time passing. That's usually the best way to decide if something is a classic. Is it, beyond getting into the individual films, because we have written a feature about, 25 films that really like have lasted from Sundance. You can find it on the site, but what is the festival, what is it like now and moving forward? Like, where do you guys see Sundance? Do you think it's always going to be a staple? Can it remain the most important American film festival moving forward?
I don't see why not. I mean, maybe calling it the most important American film festival is lofty or something, but I mean, what else do we have, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's held that for the 30 years,
like,
essentially.
Like TIFF is North American, it's Canadian, even though it's bigger. But I would argue I think in many ways TIFF is not as good because it's so star focused. But anyhow, that's how I feel about it. And Telluride's great, but it's a smaller festival. It's only like 4 days, and it's a lot smaller, and there's only like 3 or 4 premieres. So.
Does Telluride or something like South by Southwest, does anything like that even have, like, would it even have an opportunity to surpass something like Sundance? It seems like they're all kind of okay. Each festival is settled in its little niche and what it provides. But
yeah, exactly. I don't think either of them, those two in particular, would probably be, I guess, the 2 biggest ones. I guess we shouldn't count out the New York Film Festival, which is very good. All 3 of those. I mean, there's also the virtue that Sundance is at the beginning of the year. It's in January, and it's the first major big festival of the year, and so they, and everyone programs the indie titles that are going to hopefully come out later that year, so they get the jump on everybody. So that's part of it too.
Right. Yeah, I think the only way for someone else to really surpass Sundance is Sundance would really, really have to drop the ball, because right now they're every independent filmmaker's first choice. So everybody wants Sundance. So unless they took a real left turn and started, turning down a lot of great stuff, I'm not sure how they would lose it. And I remember reading a lot of stuff in the maybe earlier or mid 2000s about how maybe Sundance was starting to slip a little bit or be a little too star focused, and Paris Hilton and this and that. But I haven't really experienced that in the last 4 years of going there. So maybe whatever ground they started to lose, I think they've become pretty focused again. And like I said, I've been happy every year.
Well, and maybe that gets at what you guys were saying earlier about your Sundance is whatever you make of it. Like, you can have a completely different Sundance than anybody else. I'm sure there's people where celebrities are going to parties and all that stuff, but if you're there for the films, it sounds like you'll still be served well if you're there.
The breadth of it is what makes it unique too, because even though South by Southwest maybe has some of the same, I don't know if it has the same volume, but it's probably kind of close. But like, Tribeca and New York Film Festival and Telluride don't. So it's like that you can make it your own festival. It doesn't necessarily apply to those festivals because they don't have the same breadth of material. They're smaller. They don't have. I don't know how many films are at Sundance, but it feels like it's at least over 50. And just by virtue of them getting first, they get all the big things. So people like Tribeca and South by are left to play catch up, and then they have to do things like, it's the same thing like what happens with Cannes. Then like Telluride and TIFF and New York Film Festival, they program some of those greatest hits from those festivals, and that's sort of like, because Cannes is the biggest international festival that filmmakers save their stuff for. So in a way, all the other festivals are somewhat beholden to what happens there, and then that sort of affects the rest of their year.
What's it like being at the festival? Just like generally, I mean, you guys are seeing films almost the whole time, but what's the experience like?
It's exhausting because I guess prior to going to Sundance, I mean, I think since then I've been to a few other like TIFF, kind of round the clock festivals, but things like New York Film Fest or Tribeca, they don't really have that same atmosphere where the entire town is taken over. There's movies starting at 8:30 in the morning, and there's midnight movies, and you can just see 4 or 5 a day if you have the stamina. So if you've never been to a film festival like it, you probably can't imagine why, sitting inside and watching movies all day would be exhausting. And yet somehow it is, just kind of dashing around, trying to, hop on the shuttle, get to the next venue. And you think sometimes you have, 2 or 3 spare hours to kill between movies. And it just disappears so much quicker, just kind of getting around, trying to stay fed a little bit, doing some writing, and getting to the next movie. But it's thrilling. It's great. It's it's fun just kind of not knowing walking into every single thing for, 5 or 6 days, however long you're there, what you're going to walk out thinking about it. It's, yeah, it's great.
Festivals are also what you make it, because I know a few New York critics and friends that I'm not going to name, but will be like, I don't go to Sundance. It's full of douchebags and things like that. And, and I don't have that experience because I watch movies. And if there's douchebags in those theaters, I don't know. I don't go to parties. I don't have time to socialize. My experience is exhausting. I see at least 4 movies a day, and I write and I eat and I sleep and I get up and I do it all over again, and I leave and I do anything else. So because I can't, just don't have time for it. So if certain festivals are, and that's my experience for every festival. So if certain festivals are full of great people or horrible people or mediocre people or so-so people, I never notice because I'm watching movies. And I'm digesting movies and I'm writing about movies. So that's my experience. Telluride is a little bit different because Telluride is much slower pace. There's less films playing. There's a lot of films that have played already that you've probably already seen. So there's less running around, and actually that's why to me it's actually my favorite. It's very lovely. You do have time to sort of like you can be very diligent and still have some time to yourself and to see people. So I quite like that. It also just has a nice relaxed environment because of the pace is much different. Whereas Sundance is so many films and you have so little time that, at least for me, I eat, sleep, watch, repeat. That's it. There's nothing else.
Yeah, I always think I'd probably have more fun if I could, just shed a movie or two a day and go to a party. In 4 years, I've still never been to a Sundance party, but it's always that thing where, it was even on my way to one last year and just thought I would rather sleep right now because I'm so exhausted, or I'd rather go to a movie because I don't want to maybe miss the thing that I, might love the most. So it's just kind of that. I think if I was there for the whole 10 days, it would be a little more relaxed. But if you're going for, a long weekend, you kind of just have to go unless you're okay with, maybe missing out on the best stuff.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like maybe if I was there for like 10 days or something, I'd have more time. But like, here's the thing: would I rather, see a movie that if I don't see it now, I may not see it for 8 months, and I'm excited about it, or party with people who I could party with in New York. Like that's maybe my just thing, but I would rather party when I'm not working. You know what I mean?
Right. Make it about the films. That seems smart.
But you know what? It's an industry, and that stuff is part of it. I'm not necessarily knocking it because there's a lot of networking that's important for a lot of people, not necessarily writers, although that is important too. But certainly the filmmakers, distributors, and things like that. That's a part of that game, and that has to be done. It's not just necessarily a party. It's networking. It's connecting. It's things like that. That's very important to that part of the industry. It's just not something that I necessarily need to do, and I would rather see a movie. So
right. With other writers, I imagine it feels like if you go to Sundance, you're going to see like everybody else from every other site. I mean, is that what it's like?
Yeah, I guess pretty much.
Yeah, it's packed full. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is I wonder like how many just normal, quote unquote, normal people are just going there to see movies, or is it just overrun with media and industry people all the time?
Well, it's in Park City, it's in Utah, so I would assume that the people who like movies and of those towns, of those nearby towns, go see stuff. But yeah, I think it's definitely probably overrun by most of the industry. But can you blame them? I mean, if you're an industry person in any shape, whether it's a distributor or a writer or a producer or this or that, like why wouldn't you want to go there? Like So it's probably overrun, and I know I've heard some grumblings that people say that, oh man, this festival used to just be like, people watching movies, but now it's overrun by industry. But I don't know. It's overrun by industry, but they're still seeing movies. Everybody does. Sure, some industry people are maybe not as great and walk out and on their phones or something like that. But I don't mean you didn't hear anything about that this year, right? You haven't heard any.
No,
there was no story about the guy who called the police. So I would assume that makes it somewhat better.
Mm-hmm. How about sales this year? I mean, Sundance is another thing. It seems to be a launching pad for films to get distributed the rest of the year. Usually there's almost always a giant sale. Last year, the way back was the big one, as Rod mentioned. Doesn't seem like anything really popped like that this year.
Maybe that Manohla Dargis story resonated with distributors.
Yeah, maybe. And that definitely hit before it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sales have definitely there's been a lot of sales, but I don't think there have been a lot of those big, like, $6 million sale type thing. And that's probably better for everybody. It's really better for those companies who spend that amount of money and usually don't see that kind of return. Yeah, I think it places weird and strange expectations, and it's probably better for everybody if everyone takes a more modest approach.
Right. I mean, yeah, it seemed like there was a time where things were getting out of control and these like bidding wars would happen, and it's like they paid how much for, this movie, and it never seems to make sense by the time most of those movies make it to
yeah, and the scale of things has changed. Obviously the landscape is very, very different. Like there can be 3 million made for Drinking Buddies on VOD, which is fantastic, but that means you don't want to spend 3 million on it to buy it. You want to have something more relative, and the industry's changing. So yeah, I guess I'm not surprised in some ways. I mean, Frank was picked up by Magnolia. I'm not in their pretty smaller company. That means that movie's going to be on VOD. Mm-hmm. But they're also a terrific company, and they're great for cinephiles and people like us and people who read the site. So, I'm sure that's the right the company who believes that they can do the right thing and get it into the right hands on the right audience. So I'm sure that's the right move. Mm-hmm. If it went to Universal Pictures, it would be a waste of time, and it would be a waste for Universal.
Yeah.
It would be lost, and they'd spend money, and then they'd lose money, and then they'd get angry, and then they would never think about that again. And you know what I mean. You gotta place things in put them in the right hands.
Right. It sounds like Sundance remains relevant as a film festival, and you guys had another good year, and it seems like you'll continue to go back every year. Is that fair?
Pretty much, I think. Corey?
Maybe.
Oh, Corey, you are feeling the exhaustion.
If I can, yeah, I'd like to go back.
I think on Monday we'll probably be doing some sort of big recap of our favorite films and that sort of thing. For those who don't necessarily pay attention to the festival all the way through and kind of want to hear more about the highlights, definitely know some audiences are like that. Mm-hmm. I think on Monday we'll have a sort of like a recap of its greatest hits and that kind of. So that would be worth checking out for people who weren't following diligently throughout.
Right, absolutely. Check that out. Look for it on Monday and get you all your Sundance. You've got all the reviews that were written by Rod, Corey, and even plenty of other writers on the site, and some that just stepped up and helped while they were at the festival. So,
I think by the time all is said and done, because there's even more more reviews coming in. We're going to have over 40. I think we're going to have over 45 reviews.
There you go. So yeah, if you need to get your fix and wonder about just about all the major films that were at the festival, that's where you got to go. Check out the playlist on IndieWire. I think with that we can wrap it up. I feel like we've got a good sense of what this year's festival was like from you guys, and I want to have mercy on both of you, so maybe you can get rested up and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, hopefully we're too tired and exhausted here, although I think you can feel it from both of us a little bit.
it gives me the sense of what it's like to be at the festival, which is what I wanted to get.
So. We're spiritually broken, Eric.
You are broken men. Rest. Yes. Well, you can look forward to that if you ever go to a Sundance Film Festival, listeners. You will be broken in more ways than one, but it's all worth it. It's all worth it. Well, yeah. So I want to thank Rodrigo Perez for coming on, and Corey Everett. You guys did great work as usual, covering the festivals, and like we said, there's tons more to find out about Sundance at the playlist on IndieWire, and look forward to more of these podcasts coming again. And take it easy, you guys.
Yeah, take it easy. And lots more reviews and interviews coming next week, because there's still lots to go.
It never ends.
No.
All right.
Okay.
Later, guys.
Thanks.
Later.
Bye.